3 years ago, this committee came together on a bipartisan basis to approve the Sentencing Reform and Corrections Act legislation, which I co-authored with Senator Grassley, Senator Lee, Senator Booker, and Senator Cornyn and Whitehouse, to reduce outdated and unfair mandatory minimum sentences for qualified nonviolent offenders and establish recidivism reduction programs to prepare low-risk inmates to successfully reenter society. Later that year, the legislation was incorporated into the landmark First Step Act, which passed the Senate by a vote of 87 to 12. I might add that incorporated and partnered up with an effort by Senator Whitehouse and Senator Cornyn on prison reform. A coalition of conservative Republicans and progressive Democrats were able to resolve differences, pass the legislation, but it was in fact a first step. More has to be done to address ongoing injustice and racial disparity within our system. Reality stares us in the face. The United States still has the highest incarceration rate in the world. We have the largest total number of incarcerated individuals, more than China, Russia, or any other country. We have less than 5% of the world's population, but 22% approximately of the world's prison population. Now, the bills we vote on today are small steps toward ensuring that we are not incarcerating those who do not need to be in prison. I want to thank Ranking Member Chuck Grassley and his staff for their work in crafting these bills and an amazing effort of bipartisanship and support for them. These bills are endorsed by such a spectrum of groups. I think they indicate their support for measures which make sense on the face. American Conservative Union, Americans for Prosperity, Americans for Tax Reform, Association of Prosecuting Attorneys, Due Process Institute, Faith and Freedom Coalition, FAM, Freedom Works, Justice Action Network, the list goes on and on. Now, I'm going to, do we have? Okay. I was waiting for another member to attend. We have 6 items on the agenda. I'll get back to these bills in just a moment. But 3 nominations have been listed for the first time. Deborah Boardman to be U.S. District Court Judge for the District of Maryland, Lydia Grigsby to be U.S. District Judge for the District of Maryland, Ronald Davis to be Director of the U.S. Marshal Service, and we'll hold those nominations over at the request of the minority. Back to the bills. The first bill, the COVID-19 Safer Detention Act of 2021, will strengthen the First Step Act's Elderly Home Detention Pilot Program and Compassionate Release provision. What have we learned from this pandemic when it comes to incarceration? Sadly, that we cannot count on the Bureau of Prisons to identify those who are vulnerable and can be safely released or transferred to home detention. Let me tell you the stark facts and reality. On March 23rd, 2020, when just 3 inmates and 3 BOP staff had tested positive for COVID-19, Senator Grassley and I led a bipartisan letter. On that letter were Senators Leahy, Lee, Klobuchar, Tillis, Whitehouse, Blumenthal, Kramer, Hirono, and Booker, urging the BOP to use their authority under the First Step Act to quickly release or transfer to home confinement the most vulnerable inmates in order to slow the spread of the virus. This is March of 2020. Bureau of Prisons failed. Nearly 31,000 inmates requested compassionate release during the pandemic. The Bureau of Prisons approved 36 out of 3,100, even fewer than they had the year before the pandemic. At least 35 individuals died waiting for a decision on compassionate release. The net result was the infection rate in our prisons was 6 times what it was across America. And they still refused to give this compassionate release. The court stepped in, using the authority Congress had given them under the First Step Act to order compassionate release of more than 3,100 prisoners. I'm sure we saved many lives with those court decisions overriding the BOP decision. The COVID-19 Safer Detention Act would give judges the same authority to review BOP's decisions for elderly home detention programs and make other modest changes to ensure these programs are used to safely reduce prison populations and to protect inmates, prison staff, and families. In addition to the groups I've already mentioned, this bill is supported by the Federal Law Enforcement Officers Association, ACLU, Leadership Conference on Civil Rights, Law Enforcement, U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, many more. Bill number 2, Prohibiting Punishment of Acquitted Conduct Act of 2021. This would do just what it says. It would prohibit a judge from using acquitted conduct as the basis for sentencing a defendant. We could have also called it the Anton Scalia, Clarence Thomas, Ginsburg-Kavanaugh Act because it's based on their opinions. In a dissent from a denial of cert, Justice Scalia, before he died, joined, listen to this, with Justices Ginsburg and Thomas, sharply criticizing the unjust practice of judges increasing sentences based on conduct for which the defendant has been acquitted by a jury. Judge Scalia argued this practice is unconstitutional, and then he said, this has gone on long enough. Justice Kavanaugh made the same point when he was on the D.C. Circuit, calling the practice, quote, a dubious infringement of the right to due process and to a jury trial. The Supreme Court has not addressed this issue yet, but we shouldn't wait for them. We ought to end this unconstitutional practice. That's what the bill does. The bill has broad support. ALEC, a conservative group, ACLU, a liberal group, the Leadership Conference on Civil Rights, Sentencing Project, Texas Public Policy Foundation, and others. Finally, we will vote on the First Step Implementation Act of 2021. The bill allows judges case-by-case, individual case-by-case basis, to retroactively apply the First Step sentencing reform to sentences which were imposed prior to the First Step Act. The bill gives judges broader discretion on a case-by-case basis to apply the First Step Act safety valve provision to sentence low-level, nonviolent drug offenders who cooperate with the government below the mandatory minimum. Additionally, the bill allows courts to reduce sentences imposed on certain qualified juvenile offenders who have already served more than 20 years. That's a provision I believe Senator Cornyn and Senator Whitehouse originally authored. The bill also provides for sealing or expungement of records of nonviolent juvenile offenses and requires the Attorney General to establish procedures ensuring that only accurate criminal records are shared for employment-related purposes, provisions authored by Senator Booker, Chair of the Criminal Justice Subcommittee. If the bill will look familiar to most of us, all of these provisions, every single part of it, were included in the Sentencing Reform and Corrections Act, which this committee approved on a bipartisan 14-5 vote in 2015, and again 16-5 in 2017. I want to thank Senator Lee, who has championed the provision limiting the unfair stacking of penalties under 924C. He has told us many times of the outrageous case of Weldon Angeles that motivates him. Just like in 2015 and 2017, this bill has broad bipartisan support. I won't read all the groups that support it, but I could for the record. There were important reforms when this committee approved them in 2015 and 2017, and we still need to follow those reforms.